A few years ago, I asked a simple question. Why is marijuana illegal? Why do we hate certain plants? At what point did people decide the dandelion was a bad thing to have around? Who planted the idea in our heads that these flowers are so awful, we should pour poison on them? Think about it. We dislike dandelions so much that we're willing to pour toxic chemicals on the grass where we play with our children, just to get rid of them. Some plants are considered so harmful we've made it illegal to grow them. In a time of economic turmoil, we can't find enough money for schools or healthcare, yet we're willing to spend billions of tax dollars to try and eradicate the marijuana plant. Why? Let's take a look at cannabis and hemp and how their extraordinary, but very different benefits have been unjustly suppressed by government, law enforcement, and corporate manipulation throughout history.
Cannabis really began to be studied scientifically in 1839 with this guy, O'Shaughnessy, in India. He wrote on the preparations of the Indian hemp, or ganja. And this is the beginning of our scientific, non-religious analysis of cannabis. And then you'd start to see it in encyclopedias and mentioned in children's books such as Alice in Wonderland, and sold in botanic druggist stores like this one in Vancouver. And you'd see all sorts of cannabis products for sale there. There'd be bottles, sedatives, antidepressants, even Grimault cigarettes of cannabis indica for insomnia, amongst other things. So they were using cannabis back, 100, 150 years ago for the very same reasons that we're using it today. Even people who were considered recreational users may be self-medicating for stress and depression, and they just don't have a doctor's note. But it's all medicinal use. Every cannabis user is a medicinal user. It's just that sometimes they're using it to stay healthy instead of to get healthy.
I discriminate against no plant in the plant kingdom, so I find growing marijuana just as exhilarating as growing cucumbers or tomatoes. And through Health Canada, I'm allowed to grow my own medicine. I was involved in a pretty severe car accident that left me with a cervical neck injury and a chronic pain scenario. I was taking, at one point, sustained release morphine in conjunction with OxyContin. A lot of the times, I didn't know where I was or when I was. And it was just horrid. It was one evil or the other. Suffer the pain, the physical anguish, or take the drugs they were prescribing me, which knocked the living shit right out of me.
The word marijuana is interchangeable with the word cannabis. But here's where it gets a little confusing. Cannabis is a diverse plant species, including more than 500 different varieties. Cannabis contains THC, tetrahydrocannabinol. THC has psychoactive and medicinal properties. It's what gets you high. Botanically, hemp is classified as cannabis sativa. Hemp can have tiny amounts of THC, but not enough to get you high. So cannabis can be marijuana, but it can also be hemp. Before delving into hemp, I wanted to investigate, why is marijuana illegal?
Bottom line, it's all about money. They use different tactics to make it illegal. And the number one tactics that they used was actually racism. Here in Canada, it was the opium wars to get rid of the Chinese, right? And then they kind of tacked on the whole hemp and cannabis to that bill, to the opium bill, and they made it illegal. But when you start looking at it, the people involved were also involved in companies like DuPont.
There's no valid reason for prohibition. I mean, many people have researched into it and tried to find like a good and honorable reason that it was put on the Controlled Drugs and Substances list, which was initially the Opium Act of 1908, which turned into the Opium and Narcotics Act of 1911. Cannabis got added in 1923, which was a year after Emily Murphy published The Black Candle. It's suspicious at best, the timing. I mean, she was the first female magistrate. We owe her a great debt because she was one of the, main people that helped get the vote for women. She wrote the Black Candle in 1922, and the racism is quite thick. The views of the time were protecting temperance colony values, and which was no alcohol. Hard work and abstinence, I guess, is the way to God and the way to protect the white Anglo-Saxon race.
The Black Candle played a role in cementing a war on drugs mentality amongst Canadians and would contribute towards marijuana prohibition. On the surface, the war on drugs seemed like a simple attempt to rid society of a safety concern, but there was more to the story.
Here we have the guys that made pot illegal.
Historians typically point to Morgan, Mellon, and Rockefeller as the key conspirators that started cannabis and hemp prohibition in the United States. They did this by engineering the Marijuana Tax Act.
This is John D. Rockefeller Sr., and him, along with Carnegie, published this report called the Flexner Report of 1910. And what it did was it told people who gave money to medical schools to stop giving money to the herb schools. Just give money to the pills, knives, and needles schools of medicine. And so by 1937, when the Marijuana Tax Act came out, there was no herbalist around to speak up on behalf of cannabis medicines. Now, the Marijuana Tax Act was organized in part by Andrew Mellon, who had a lot of politicians on the payroll. And Mellon and Rockefeller hung out. And they were all part of the oil industry in the United States. Rockefeller owned Standard Oil, which was 95% of all the oil in the US, and Mellon owned Gulf Oil, which was a large percentage of the rest.
J.P. Morgan was Rockefeller's main banker and dominated the New York economic hierarchy. And there was one more person who aided Morgan, Mellon, and Rockefeller.
Most people have heard of William Randolph Hearst, who owned lots of newspapers, like half the newspapers in the United States. And this guy also owned a bunch of timberland in Mexico. And this guy, Pancho Villa, this Mexican revolutionary, stole 800,000 hectares of Hearst's timberland in Mexico, back for the Mexican people. Now, Hearst didn't like that, so he started to attack the Mexicans, and what they did was they said that they were smoking marijuana, the sex cigarette, and carousing with wanton women. So Hearst stopped using the word cannabis and stopped using the word hemp in his newspapers and only spoke about marijuana. And this was what the Mexicans enjoyed smoking. So he used his newspapers to fool people into thinking that marijuana was a bad thing that caused rape and insanity. And that's the beginnings of marijuana prohibition.
Today, it would be hard to find someone who thinks marijuana use causes rape or insanity. Some may believe marijuana is illegal because there's a chance people can become addicted. This is an interesting argument, because there are many people who are addicted to caffeine, nicotine, or alcohol. Yet none of those types of users go to jail for smoking cigarettes, drinking a coffee, or having a beer. Cigarettes, alcohol, and even caffeine have caused more deaths than marijuana. In fact, there are no confirmed published cases worldwide of human deaths from cannabis poisoning. So why is marijuana illegal? Why didn't prohibition happen for coffee and cigarettes? And why did it end for alcohol? And more importantly, if addiction is the concern, does prohibition even work?
Does prohibition stop people from becoming addicted?
No.
Or,
No.
yeah.
No, we saw that with prohibition of alcohol. There were ways around it, and there were still alcoholics. You're using a fairly blunt social instrument, applied very broadly with significant impacts, but still pretty blunt to treat a disease. Really, when you look at the neuroscience of addiction, you're looking at a form of acquired brain injury. The brain is altered by repeated use of substances. It changes the way people think and feel and behave. And to reverse that through treatment takes time for people to get back to a normal way of thinking, problem solving, decision making, and behaving. So prohibition is a very blunt way to treat that.
The drug war is totally futile, that it's disastrous and does more damage than the drugs themselves could possibly ever do.
The time has come for all politicians to look at, including that in their platform, legalizing marijuana. I think that it's a good idea myself. For the cop on the street, if he comes across somebody with a joint in his pocket or a small bag of grass, if marijuana is legal, well, that's just one less thing that he has to deal with, one less arrest he may have to make, a lot less paperwork he has to do. I think it's going to have an impact more on the cops that work in drug sections, whether it's the RCMP or municipal police force. Because if marijuana is legalized and the government has some kind of control over it, the way they have control over tobacco and alcohol, then you're not going to have cops having to deal with pushers and suppliers who are selling marijuana and hashish. The drug squads can concentrate on crystal meth, crack, all of the other more serious drugs.
Today, there are people who can legally possess and grow cannabis under the MMAR. Matt Murnaugh recently challenged the current laws on the basis that Canada's medical marijuana regulations are ineffective and prevent suffering people from obtaining the most effective medicine with the least side effects to treat their conditions.
I'm the author of Marijuana Smoker's Guidebook, an easy way to identify and enjoy marijuana strains from Green Candy Press. I grow marijuana, I smoke marijuana, and I love it. I have a brain tumor back here. I got into it in 1997. A friend of mine thought I was taking a lot of Demerol and painkillers. A friend of mine switched me to marijuana because they thought it would be safer and easier for me. Like a year and a half later, I started growing. I was like, this is amazing. I gotta have more of this. I'm tired of calling 10 guys. I'm gonna grow it myself. And so I started doing all that. In 2008 was the first time ever I've been arrested and busted. I got the police cleared out my house. It's been a 5-year fight. We won at trial. I won my constitutional exemption. We struck down the marijuana laws. It was recently overturned by Court of Appeal. And my legal crew are working diligently to get us in front of the Supreme Court of Canada to overturn that. And it would be the first time medical marijuana is heard at the Supreme Court of Canada level.
My name is Marvin Morton. I'm a retired provincial court judge in the province of Ontario. I've been retired officially for 3 years. I was contacted about LEAP through a volunteer organization that I was a member of, and eventually met Miss Mearden, who suffers from multiple sclerosis, and became very intrigued with the fact that we did have medical marijuana licenses available to people, that they were difficult to obtain, and that it was expensive for a lot of people.
Once licensed by Health Canada, there are 3 ways to obtain marijuana. You can grow it yourself, you can hire someone to grow it for you, or you can buy dried marijuana from Health Canada. Prairie Plant Systems, located in my hometown of Saskatoon, is currently the sole provider of dried marijuana to Health Canada.
In the mid-90s, we looked at the possibility, or could see, the convergence of pharmacy and biotech, where plants could be designed to make certain proteins or certain therapeutics. And during the business model at the time was to be a service provider to the larger pharmaceutical companies who could take, have their plants of interest, could be grown, contained facility underground, and we would be a service provider on contract back to the companies that might be doing it. But we could see that was coming because plants are really great at photocopying compound. Once you teach them to do stuff, they do it really well for a very long time, and you can clone the plants quite easily after that. So if we have the genetic containment of a highly valuable plant, such as a pharmaceutical, and doing it in that environment, we could actually build a business around that. And we were having credibility issues because nobody believed that we could actually have a lab underground and do things. So what we did is that we, serendipitously, along came Health Canada and put out this bid for a contract to produce medical marijuana.
You know, I was a father of 2. I really wasn't active in anything to do with marijuana. I had stopped smoking it years prior, just because I had had enough at one point, I guess. And a buddy came in to visit me, and he said, look, he says, you're taking all these painkillers. He says, why don't you try smoking grass? I'm like, yeah, wouldn't that be great? You know, and as a matter of fact, I did. He had given me some. When I smoked it for the first time in my life, out of a recreational stance, I had recognized its benefits. It's going to work. That doesn't cause such terrible side effects. So I immediately go to my doctor and I said, look, you know, Health Canada has warranted medicinal marijuana for spinal injuries. I qualify. Would you please give me a prescription for marijuana? And he says, well, I can't jeopardize my entire practice on the basis of one prescription for marijuana. And I said, well, look, I have an instant release morphine for breakthrough pain. I have a sustained release morphine. I have a prescription for Oxycontin. My bowels don't function. My brain's not working clearly. I've lost all sexual drive. I'm nauseated constantly through the day. I'm suffering here. And he looks at me and says, well, for the sexual drive, I'll give you some Viagra. For the nausea, I'm going to give you some Gravol. For the constant spasm, I'm going to give you a drug called Flexeril that relaxes the spasm. For the constipation, I'm going to give you a herbal laxative. And I looked at him and I said, logically, you're concerned about my addiction to the traits of marijuana while I'm taking a synthetic heroin, and you're supplying me 4 other drugs to counteract the side effects of the synthetic heroin.
It wasn't really until I turned 17 that I started smoking every day, and it was because I had to. I got diagnosed with an illness all over my body that's called rheumatoid arthritis. So it's not like your regular arthritis. It kind of affects your immune system like a cancer would and just goes into every one of your joints. So it doesn't specifically attack anything. So every morning when I wake up, it's constant pain. I feel stiff like there's sandpaper inside of my joints. So to wake up and actually feel like I want to walk out the door, I have to have a puff. And it completely, I don't know if it makes me ignore the pain, not think about it. Honestly, I don't really care. It makes me feel good. It makes me not feel the sandpaper in my joints. And that's something that I've used every day now. And I haven't changed my life in any other ways because of it. I'm still really dedicated, determined, a hard worker, and it just made me work harder at the things that I love, which are the marijuana activism and why I really started getting into working at head shops.
I'm not convinced that smoking cannabis is bad for you. In fact, I think it's very good for me, and I do believe that it would be attributable to the health that I've enjoyed my life, really.
It does 3 things, I think, and that's it calms the nervous system. 2, it helps the mind, it relaxes stress. It releases, you know, the shamans used to say it shifts the assemblage point. It doesn't reset you, but it makes you kind of wake up. It makes you more alert, more aware. You know, people take it the wrong way and don't think what's happening to them when they're on a certain thing. Like, you know, it's people who compare drugs and think cannabis is a drug, I think is a joke. You know, like cocaine and, you know, PCP and meth, those are processed chemicals. This isn't something that just smoked right out of the ground.
What I believe to be true about cannabis is that it's not a very harmful substance. In fact, it might well be good for us. And Barack Obama was a big-time pot smoker in his college years. Admittedly proven pictures out there, for God's sakes. This guy knows the same as what I know in his heart of hearts. So why is he hanging on to this thing so dearly? What's at stake here? I don't get it.
All of our profits from these magazines are donated to a medical marijuana cause in Calgary. We do a lot of work with KDK distributors, who also they work with Treating Yourself with Marco.
Hi, I'm Marco Renda, publisher of Treating Yourself magazine and I am the promoter of this expo.
We all want to end prohibition of cannabis, but we all have different reasons for wanting to do so. In my case, I've got 3 different background pieces that have driven me to become an activist in this cause. One is that I'm a former high school teacher. I was getting very frustrated with the hypocrisy that we would have these marvelous professional presentations about responsible use of alcohol. But when it came to cannabis use, the only answer we were allowed to say is no, don't do it. And I found that very frustrating, and I found that that was not providing our youth with the information that they really needed to make educated choices as young adults. I am also the mother of 2 young adults, so that's another reason why I come to this cause as well. I, in fact, am a non-consumer, but I think it's our responsibility to provide for the next generation an improved system in our society. And if that means changing the law, then that's why I'm here.
Along with the fight to legalize marijuana, there is also an ongoing battle to loosen the restrictions on growing hemp.
I started writing this book, Hempology 101, 18 years ago when I first came across the group in Vancouver, and I moved to Victoria to get Hempology 101 active in that community and write a book. And now I teach a free non-credit lecture series at the University of Victoria. It'll be my 9th year coming up. We have the largest student club on campus at UVic, and we've expanded Hempology now to 8 different schools in 5 provinces across Canada. Last summer, I actually drove to northern Saskatchewan to visit a hemp farm. It was really exciting to run through some hemp fields and see what people were doing with that plant. And it is certainly a growing industry. We're the #1 seed producers in the world here in Canada. And we're starting to get into using the fiber with different plants. I think Manitoba is going to have a industrial insulation factory starting up, and building materials seems to be the first market that hemp fiber products will be getting into.
Some friends were using hemp and cotton for diapers, non-disposable diapers, and were raving about the absorbency of hemp. And it hit me to make it for ladies and their bras. But then it turns out there's a whole bunch of people with a whole bunch of skin problems all over their bodies, and they all like to order. So I do apologize for the strictly bra focus.
For 1 acre of hemp, it's about 4.7 acres of trees. That's how much herd, or that's how much fiber you can get out of that. So it's a good thing for the human race, and I saw a business idea. It's a new market, so that means if we lay the foundations, we might have profit for other generations. What you do is you shred it, basically, and once it's shred, you run it through a pulverizer or a hammer mill to make it a powder. And then what you do is you get this technology to pellet it. So through heat, humidity, and compression, it brings it into a pellet-sized form. My focus is the straw right now. So the thing is, they waste the straw. So you can go and get it for a relatively low price. And then afterwards, when your plant gets built, you can get contracts for it. Generally speaking, for building materials, you only want the inside.
So when they make hempcrete, what are they doing?
They take this inside part, this is herd.
Yeah.
And they crush it up, they shred it until it's like a powder. And once it's in this powdery state, they have a rotary drum mixer, and they mix in lime. It's a certain blend of lime. And when they mix the 2 together, it creates hempcrete. And I'm not sure if there's water that they also apply, but that and hemp herd creates this hempcrete. They mix it up, and you have to use it immediately. So if you think about it, you're not only taking something that's a waste, but you're using it in a sector that demands bio and green products. So it's a win-win situation either way. Like in total, the processing plant, will have a lower emission standard than, let's say, the others. Hemp straw can be processed into just about everything. The hemp plant, you have the seed for food. You can make textiles out of the straw for anything, any type of clothing you want. Not only that, they're superior. The other reason I think that makes hemp an interesting commodity is for fuel. It yields one of the most out of all the plants biomass per acre.
to grow hemp for fuel, you know, food, fuel, fiber, fun, or medicine, those are kind of the four main things. To grow hemp for fuel would also be quite amazing. And when you're growing for fiber, you grow really tall plants. They have more biomass available. When you grow for seed, you typically grow short, squat plants, so you don't normally have a lot of fuel or fiber in there really. But when you go for fiber, you can also get the fuel out of it as well in that sense by processing the hemp herds, the inner pulpy core. But there again, we need more infrastructure in place. It's not really feasible for a farmer right now to grow a lot of hemp fiber or to grow fiber or to grow hemp for fuel because they don't have a place to process it and manufacture it. It's not really all set up yet. And so I'd like to see our government invest a bit of money in that kind of infrastructure rather than continuing to subsidize the petrochemical industry and the amount of subsidies that go to that. For a tiny fraction of what we spend on subsidizing petroleum, we could develop a really positive hemp industry in Canada for fiber and for fuel.
It's pyrolysis oil. It's basically oil from biomass. And this stuff is much more potent than octane or from gasoline. So this is real technology. This is doable. But you know, a plant costs like 30 million to make. On top of that, you need the right engineers, you need the people with the right knowledge. It's not just building the plant, getting the money, it's finding the right people to do that.
It turns out hemp ethanol is the best replacement for gasoline we could possibly imagine. It's 5 or 6 times cheaper at the pump. It costs about $500 to convert any gasoline-powered car into a hemp ethanol-powered car. There'd be no more oil spills because a hemp ethanol spill would just evaporate. There'd be no more oil wars because hemp can grow in sand, which means it could grow in any country on Earth. And there'd be no more climate change anymore. Hemp ethanol would reverse the greenhouse effect because as you grow the fuel, 30% of the CO2 goes back into the soil every year in the form of roots and leaves. So again, just to summarize, 5 times cheaper at the pump, no more oil spills, no more oil wars, and no more climate change. See, the only drawback is ExxonMobil won't be able to make billions and billions of dollars anymore. That money will go to farmers and seed breeders. And some people say, well, that's not really a downside. Well, it is when you consider that the oil companies really control the government through campaign contributions, through their ownership of the mass media, through their threats of capital flight. They exert an inordinate amount of influence on our democracy. And so they make it a bad thing for them to go out of business. They say, oh, you can't live without us. You'll never survive without oil or nuclear energy. And that's why hemp was made illegal, and that's why it continues to be illegal, is because the most powerful people on planet Earth are making money selling hemp substitutes.
There are a lot of theories on why marijuana is illegal. And the idea that cannabis is illegal because monopolists in various industries didn't want to compete with hemp may sound far-fetched, but consider 2 key facts. 1, hemp can't get you high. You could smoke an entire field of it and you wouldn't catch a buzz. 2, cannabis would go to seed if you tried to grow it within a kilometer of a hemp field. So the argument to regulate hemp because growers might sneak in a pot plant is scientifically impossible. Yet for some reason, hemp is still overregulated.
If you take out hemp, you've just taken out one of your major competitors. And it continues on to this day. If I were to take a group who is the biggest opponent that I have, it's the pharmaceutical companies. You know, pain relief, nausea, sleep, the list just goes on and on. Well, start thinking about how many pills that is, how many different kinds of pills that is. You know, it's, you know, like a lot of people are wondering about our healthcare system. Well, our federal government actually did a study. Where do our healthcare dollars go? And they found out that 70 cents of every healthcare dollar that we spend goes to pharmacare. It was the largest expense, the fastest growing expense over 10 years. You know, and then these politicians that represent us, what was their response to that report? They added 2 years to the patent laws before we get the cheap generic version of the drug. So I think it went from 5 to 7 years now before we get the cheap generic drug. So they read this report, it says that this is where all our healthcare dollars are going, and they made it worse.
17 years ago, soon after starting Hempology, I founded the first medical dispensary in Canada. The Victoria Cannabis Buyers Club has now been selling cannabis products to sick people for over 17 years. It's had its ups and downs. We've had 4 police raids in our store between 2002, 2003. We beat every single charge that's ever been laid against me or any of the employees of the place. In fact, a couple years our bakery got raided, and my friend Owen Smith was charged with trafficking THC for making food and skin products for sick people, because Health Canada's regulations don't allow people to make their own extracts out of cannabis. They're allowed to use the raw plant, but not allowed to make hash or honey oil or make butter out of it even. And so we had a court hearing last year where we convinced a judge that the MMAR were unconstitutional, and he struck the regulations down. The government is appealing the decision. Hopefully we go all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, because we want a very strong and binding decision on the government here that allows patients to make whatever products they want. If they have the plant, they should be able to make medicine from it and not have the THC be privilege of pharmaceutical companies to have strict control over. Because you can buy synthetic THC at $8 a pill, but if you extract it from the plant, somehow you've produced a drug that's illegal. So, the judge saw the absurdity of it, and we're certain that judges higher up will as well.
What's medically active are the cannabinoids, and we have oral preparations that are on the formulary that we can prescribe that have cannabinoids in them. But they're at a much lower dose than what you would see in smoked marijuana. So giving people enough of the tablets or capsules, if you will, to mimic the effect of smoked marijuana would be a challenge. So the difference is in the delivery system.
So right now the new regulations anticipate a maximum 150 grams a month, which is 5 grams a day. And right now the average dose that the patients that we supply to on a monthly basis is between 1 and 3 grams a day, with clearly the average dose being 2 grams a day.
A family member of Bernie's came to me expressing that one of his family members was suffering from cancer, and I questioned him what kind of cancer. And he expressed to me it was lung. So I knew immediately that respiratory was out. So smoking wasn't going to be it. Even vaporization wasn't going to be it. There's a methodology in production of cannabis. It's called cold water extraction. The street term for it would be bubble hash. What this allots us the availability to do is take a portion, the most important part of the plant. We can blend this with actual dairy butter and make it into edibles, chocolates, cookies, and whatnot, consumable for patients that can't smoke. There's an issue here though. Health Canada only warrants medical marijuana for smokable use, not edible. It's illegal to transform it into an oil form or into a bubble hash form and make it into edibles. Now, shortly after that, Bernie's brother came back to me and expressed to me that the doctor had prescribed her edible marijuana after she had already consumed the cookies. And I said, well, that's great, but Health Canada doesn't warrant. We can't go to Shoppers Drug Mart and get edible marijuana. So we were left to go call on the compassionate group to have it processed. So there are individuals that have stood aside from what the laws and restrictions are and produced it anyways.
Primarily for weight loss associated with HIV/AIDS, primarily for nausea and vomiting related to chemotherapy, some neurological disorders where there's spasticity of the muscles to create some relaxation. Pain relief is a bit more controversial. Some studies say that it helps, others don't. I think it depends upon the pain syndrome and also how the pain is being interpreted in the individual's brain, because of course that's where all of it happens. And it's that central nervous system interaction of the substance and the pain and the other condition that determine whether or not there's any efficacy. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge to sort that out. And frankly, it hasn't gone through usual drug approval processes. So there's a lot that we don't know about marijuana, which is why a lot of physicians are reluctant to prescribe it.
It's extremely hard to find a doctor willing to fill out the Health Canada exemption, right? So our club, we basically run off of medical necessity. So if you have a chronic or fatal condition, and all you have to do is advise your doctor, it's not about getting a prescription or a recommendation, and if you advise them, then you have a Charter 7 challenge for medical necessity, and that's all we require to become a member of our club. And then the next step up is to try and get the doctor to fill out the Health Canada cards.
Particularly prior to the medical marijuana licenses being granted, there was a push to pursue Section 7 charter rights and the use of medicinal marijuana, not recreational, but medicinal. And the idea was that the concept of making marijuana illegal for people that require it for medicinal purposes was an attack against their rights and freedoms and attack against their right to life, liberty, and security of the person. And the frustration many people were feeling as a result of being prescribed narcotics, opiates, and hard drugs by a doctor, and not being able to use what would be considered a soft drug.
I don't have a medicinal card myself. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think it's a great step forward in the movement that we're able to get a permit for ourselves to not be stopped on the street with our bag of medicine and get thrown in jail. So anybody out there who has the chance to should. But I have the chance to kind of be a role model in a way, I guess.
What about those patients out there that need marijuana are going to have a fight to get it? Where we're battling doctors that won't approve when the federal government is saying yes, and some science says yes, and we still got that mentality of Nancy Reagan, just say no to drugs. But I know what it's doing. I can feel the positive effects. I really believe, it's my opinion, my personal opinion, is the fact is that if a law is wrong, then it's our right to violate it, because I know what the effects of the medicine are. I know how it works for me, and I've seen it work with numerous people. MS patients, people suffering from cancer, people that are in grave amounts of pain. It has alleviated, it causes distraction from the pain. I wouldn't, from my own experience, I'd say it distracts me from the pain, it doesn't eliminate the pain. Now, in your circumstances, Bernie, when you consume it in an edible form, does it relieve? Does it give, what does it do for you when you take it? Now, for example, you're taking it in tea today.
Yeah, the tea is very good, less effective than the cookies. But I've only started out with small amounts.
Yeah.
I'm still experimenting with going higher and higher. So, but it's been great for pain relief. It's
And it allows you to sleep?
it allows me to sleep.
Now what have you guys seen with Bernie when she takes the medicine?
Well, see, I've been just around Bernie for the time that she's been here, on the most part. But since it's been here, it seems like she gets, like a lot of relief from it. I'm pushing it all the time.
Yeah.
But when she's so limited on what she's been given to alleviate pain, you'll take whatever you can.
The substance with regards to what we can learn from its activity in the body, why we have naturally occurring cannabinoid receptors in our brain, in our bodies, what that means to us as organisms, how we can stimulate them or block them in order to get a medicinal effect. And I mentioned if you have a cannabinoid blocking agent that would reduce appetite for weight loss and so on, that would have great value. Currently for people that are morbidly obese, we do gastric bypass procedures and other surgical interventions because the lifestyle ones are sometimes very challenging and very intense in order to accomplish the weight loss goal. So there's always a market, and people always looking for things for weight loss. But that's an example of how you simply turn the bioactivity of the compound around to see where there are ways that one can benefit from it in terms of a health outcome.
You know, in the early 90s, 1990, 1992, they discovered CB1 and CB2 receptors respectively, right? One is in the blood and one is in the nervous system. And those receptors are what we react to because we have a natural endocannabinoid system. And so when we ingest the material that's herbal, it reacts with these identified CB1 and CB2 receptors. Now, there's a sense that there may be more receptors, which would mean more receptive to other types of cannabinoid-based. Just as a fluke of nature that what Mother Nature produces actually matches our own system, if you think about it, right? Coevolution, right? And it just so happens to match in that one form for us to, and so it's just as a fluke. But it's just like every other, you know, like how aspirin made from willows affects pain. It's a sort of, or an opiates affects some forms of, you know, for sleeping like codeine. It's a sort of the same thing. Cannabis has the cannabinoids that react with our own system, and that's why it works.
My father was diagnosed with cancer. He tried a number of different things, decided to go the chemotherapy way. And as an alternative sort of a medicine, I had been suggesting the possibility of using phoenix tears to maybe stop the progression of the cancer that was growing in his body. So we acquired the phoenix tears, and I tried it to make sure that it was going to be okay for my dad. You know, I was just skeptical at first because I didn't know what it was going to be like. So I tried a small amount of it, thinking, okay, you know, I'll try this and see if Dad's going to be able to handle it. So I tried it, and I was affected. I had some mild euphoria, but in the end, I found it to be tolerable, and thought that it was a great thing that we could try alternatively for Dad.
If you look in Exodus 30:23, you'll find something called cannabosum, and that means canna means cane, and bossum means stinky or smelly. That's what cannabis means, stinky stick. And this area of the Bible, of the Old Testament, was a list of ingredients in the holy anointing oil. And that's where we get the words Christ and Messiah from, the anointed one. So the anointed one was, they poured like 9.5 pounds of pot in 1.5 gallons of olive oil all over them. And they got really high just through the skin. And they would pour this stuff on the incense altars, and it would fill up the tent with smoke. And so that was what Moses did. And he would forbid anyone but prophets, priests, and kings to use this holy anointing oil and send off into the desert anyone else who used it.
The frustration people that use marijuana, it's growing. But many marijuana users, which is somewhat surprising, or it's been somewhat surprising to me to learn, is that many marijuana users do not drink alcohol, and many marijuana users don't use any other drugs. They don't use any other drugs. They don't even use Tylenol. They won't use any other drugs. They will only use marijuana. And the fact that people are required to have a prescription for something that they can grow in their own home or grow in their backyard without adding chemicals, without adding anything, just a seed, planted in the ground, and it grows. They're required to get a doctor's note to say that they can smoke what they can grow right in their own home. And that really is frustrating for people. And so I understand the frustration, and I understand the concept that people say, why should I do this? So I'm not going to.
What is your opinion about the law in regards to marijuana?
When it comes down to cases like this, you know, it's stupid. It has to be available whichever way you can get it. It doesn't matter whether it's legal or illegal. If it alleviates pain, you need it.
And there's nothing you wouldn't do to get it.
Yeah. And the rest of it, it's, you know, like the people who are criminals make their money off of it. They'll make their money off of selling anything. And, but when it's used for medicine, somebody wants to make money off of it. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, from the criminal element, right, or the pharmaceutical drug companies, because they can't make anything off of it, or enough off of it.
Well,
and I think
it doesn't have the power anyway to.
Well, see, and that's what we we want to change the structure and the beliefs. When I went to school, I was taught just say no to drugs.
Yeah.
That marijuana was the root of evil. And,
Yeah.
and when I looked at the history, what I found through the studies of history was what I was taught was false. It was a lie.
One of the challenges around marijuana is that a lot of people's lens through which they view marijuana might be one that's generational, in that it's based upon their experience of marijuana available in the 60s and 70s with maybe a 6% THC content. Well, now we're 2 or 3 times that because of the cultivation of marijuana and hydroponic gardening and so on. Much more concentrated THC content, stronger, more potent drug. And it does have psychoactive properties. Some people run into problems. Some people do have a withdrawal syndrome when they stop. Some people do have negative consequences in terms of a loss of motivation and so on, and attention in terms of work and school, and performance suffers as a result. But there are other people that are exposed to it that don't run into problems. No different than alcohol. A lot of people are social drinkers, and they're able to manage and contain it and still do their work.
Just about every call that I went on that involved alcohol usually involved somebody who was fighting, argumentative, causing a disturbance, those kinds of things. Whereas if you came across somebody who smoked a couple of joints, generally that person was very passive.
Why does this prohibition continue?
Well, that's what I'm wondering. Like,
Stephen Harper, he's going to say, oh, it's because all drugs are bad and it's the kids. All right, it's bullshit. Just a fucking garbage answer. Really, why? What's the big deal? If in fact Stephen Harper wants to build private prisons and fill those with people for an industry, create jobs, right? If in fact that's what he wants to do, that's horrendous.
I was in Johannesburg, and there it is. I learned that most of the jails are private jails, owned by Wack and Hut Industries, one of the biggest security companies in the world. We are now getting the same big jail, super jail thing here. What are we going to do? Start arresting people for minor possession and throwing them in jail? Is that, I mean, in jail, there's a jail economy.
First and foremost, if we want to talk about civil liberties and human lives and the human cost of the war on drugs, we need to stop arresting people and putting them in prison for a harmless activity, for a peaceful activity that isn't causing any harm to anyone beyond the prohibition of it. So these people who are being put in prison under this drug war need to go home.
even before Bernie met you, I know she was on there was about 5 or 6 different types of pills that she was taking, and
more than that.
Yeah, it's got to be more than that. And since she started taking it, that's been heave-holed out. Like it's about 5 or 6 that she hasn't had to take, and just the difference that it's made. She's sleeping a lot better. The pain, I can't imagine the pain, but what I see from my own point is she's tolerating the pain a lot more. And at this stage, I know she doesn't have much time left. But I think like for everybody, that's near and dear to her. It's all about the comfort level.
for any pharmaceutical research, you need funding and appreciation that there's going to be a market out there. So there's cannabinoid research related to pain and muscle spasticity in a way that gets beyond the smoked formulation. Although having the smoked formulation there creates a disincentive for pharmaceutical companies to get into a market that they can't compete with because of the amount of money they would have to put into research to actually bring a drug to market through proper clinical trials and evaluation. So there's that issue, there's the research issue.
I would like to get arrested, not that I would enjoy it, but I would like to if I did, so that I could just show people I'm in jail for smoking a medicine, and there's also rapists and murderers in jail, and just show that contrast and how much it doesn't make any sense that I'm using a medicine to help myself get by every day and that I could be thrown in jail for it.
Resistance against laws it sometimes proves to be beneficial to people, but it's always at an expense. The justice system is faced with the expense of running trials on these issues. The citizen themselves is forced to hire legal counsel, which is at an expense. And it's at an emotional expense for these people to get through the justice system, knowing that they could potentially face sanction or a criminal record for somebody who is not a criminal to have a criminal record.
I've never seen a march in the city of people saying we want tougher pot laws. But you've seen tens of thousands of Canadians march year after year after year and ask to have these laws relaxed.
Taxpayers are being robbed of billions of dollars for drug war enforcement. It goes from the courts to the policing to the incarceration to the prison industry, and it goes into the costs that you can't even calculate.
So many lives are ruined that we're not really exposed to it. It becomes part of the machine and part of the system. But a lot of people get processed through the justice system in both countries, and for most of them, it's even if when they get out of jail, it's still a lifelong penalty that you carry. In fact, even being charged with the cannabis offense and not being convicted can restrict you getting across the border to the U.S. You don't even have to have a conviction for them to look it up and see you've been charged, and that can be enough to be blocked in your travel. And so the consequences of these things can be quite severe.
There's no secret that there is a benefit to people, to citizens that are employed in areas that are involved in the prosecution of marijuana, or jails are being built, people are being employed building jails, correctional guards are being employed for people that attend jails, defense lawyers are busier, there's more jobs for prosecutors, there's more jobs for police. It's a job creating area, there's no question about it, that the prosecution and the prohibition against marijuana use, possession, and production creates jobs for people. And there's a direct benefit to us, even me as a lawyer, there's a direct benefit to the stronger law against marijuana use. I directly benefit on a monthly basis from strict marijuana laws. And society as a whole, I don't know if they benefit. I mean, that's the issue.
So if society doesn't benefit from strict marijuana and hemp laws, then who does? If it is powerful 20th century corporations that created monopolies to make themselves rich, why do they continue? Why not end prohibition now that they've made their money?
In a mind of a monopolist, they don't just want to make money. They want to make all the money. And you can't monopolize a farm crop. Anybody can grow it. So the guys who are creating the raw materials will be everybody who wants to, and in a market that's reasonable. And so in order to maintain a monopoly on fuel, they've got to maintain hemp prohibition, or over-regulation of industrial hemp. Right now, you got to buy the hemp seeds from the same guy every year. You can't breed your own seeds unless you have a breeder's license. To get a breeder's license, you need to apprentice under a breeder for 10 years and have a science degree. It's easier to be a brain surgeon than be a hemp breeder. And so they've monopolized and overregulated the hemp industry using the evils of marijuana on our children as an excuse to do so. So the way to remove the red tape around industrial hemp is to legalize pot for social purposes, to move to a wine model and eventually a coffee bean model of distribution so that you can remove the overregulation around industrial hemp.
If Monsanto has their way, they literally own like 80% of the seeds being dispersed in North America right now. So if that continues on, there's not going to be any seeds that we can reproduce ourselves. And that's a scary prospect because that's not just like cannabis, which is an awesome healing medicine and a good source of food. That's all our food. So that becomes an important thing for all of humanity.
The hemp seed, it's kind of weird. Hemp is one of the only non-GMO plants today still. It's just non-genetically modified. They just keep breeding it with other varieties. That's the cool thing. Hemp has a sex. It's the only plant with a sex. So you can basically breed it a certain way, and different traits from other plants you can merge together. Cannabis can do that too. What they should be doing is taking the hemp plant, the tallest variety, combining it with the cannabis, the most potent in THC, mixing the two. Then you could have medicine, that much medicine more per acre.
With so many advantages, it's hard to imagine any good reason why hemp is overregulated and cannabis or marijuana is illegal. And with these clear advantages, the government still seems to be making poor leadership choices.
We've made a lot of progress in terms of getting things changed in Canada, but the laws themselves have actually just been getting worse. We've had success in that hemp cultivation is now widespread, whereas 2 decades ago you couldn't grow hemp in Canada. Medical cannabis is widely available. The government's actually growing medical cannabis, admittedly low grade, but nevertheless it's a step forward. Bongs and pipes and grow books are available, but most of these laws still stay in place. In fact, bongs and pipes and grow books are illegal in Canada, and most of these laws are still in place. In fact, they've gotten worse. The same day that Washington and Colorado in the US passed their wonderful referendums to legalize cannabis at the state level, in Canada, our mandatory minimums came into place, and Stephen Harper's new punishments for cultivation of cannabis, 6 months in prison for growing 6 or more plants, also a lengthy sentence for trafficking in cannabis, which would apply to me and everyone in our dispensaries and all the other dispensaries in Canada. But when I look to the US and I see how they've changed their laws, and aside from Washington and Colorado having their referendum votes, at the same time, Massachusetts became the 18th state to legalize medical access to cannabis. That's an average of more than 1 state a year allowing medical marijuana since California became the first in 1996. And in all those cases, all these victories when it comes to actually changing the laws have come through ballot initiatives, referendums, grassroots efforts, often or usually against the will of politicians. In Washington and Colorado, governors campaigned against these laws, but they passed with big majorities anyways.
We have got to stop arresting people for something that doesn't hurt anybody. And that's personal choice. They can choose to use marijuana, and we shouldn't be punishing them for that. For me, that's most important, because once you stop arresting people, then you can start finding out how much money is being saved.
Things are changing fast in the world and will continue to do so now. But those 2 votes in Colorado and Washington they're the guy flicking the first domino.
In many ways, where you spend your money is your vote. If you buy stuff off these large corporations at Walmart, well, you're voting for China and Walmart and whatever else is behind that. But if people start eating hemp in particular, it's healthier for them. Certainly, I've been a vegetarian now for 16, almost 17 years, and I'm proving that eating cannabis is a better replacement than eating meat or all the other substitutes like soya that are out there. I'm a very healthy man. I've got a Project Team 420 that I'm developing that's kind of engaging in athletics to prove that cannabis is healthy for athletes and for the average person. So eating hemp is probably the most important thing that people could do, because it not only sustains themselves, it makes them healthier, makes their immune systems work better, and all sorts of other disease-fighting goodies are in the cannabis seeds. So A, you're making yourself healthier, and B, you're supporting hemp farmers and supporting people that are in the industry directly, which will encourage them to get into more hemp food products and then eventually, be able to, get into the whole range of hemp products that are out there.
If we were to look at this another way and to say the government has made a lot of money on the sale and consumption of alcohol, if the government was to legalize marijuana and do so responsibly, not selling it to minors, for example. I don't think many marijuana activists would think that was appropriate. Not selling it to minors, making it legal, cutting the organized crime out of the equation, making it taxable, making money on a recreational substance, which is no different than alcohol, which is no different than caffeine, which is no different than many substances that citizens consume on a daily basis that let them feel euphoric, that let them feel relaxed, that give them an ability to get out of bed in the morning some days. The taxation of marijuana, I would suggest, would clearly have more benefit than the benefit of building jails or lining the pockets of justice system participants.
I found diverse perspectives on hemp and marijuana. Innovative ideas, solid factual arguments, and even borderline conspiracy theory. The consensus was that prohibition isn't working, that cannabis is a plant that naturally grows a flower with extraordinary potential, and it's wrong to put people in jail for growing this flower.
Progress has been made with citizens' initiatives in the United States, and there is one province in Canada that allows for a citizens' initiative to take place, and that's British Columbia.
Now, in British Columbia, we're the only province in Canada that also has a referendum system. We also have a system whereby citizens can gather signatures for a ballot initiative and force a vote on a piece of legislation they've prepared. It's harder in BC than any American state in terms of how many signatures you need to get something on the ballot, but it can be done.
The best campaign I've seen so far is the Sensible BC campaign. That's at least something that British Columbians can do to at least change the laws in the province, and the referendum that's upcoming through sensiblebc.ca. That's a really good plan. And I think that is something that would at least change the laws somewhat in British Columbia. And that's something that if you live in British Columbia, I really, really hope people participate in and vote in.
First of all, we don't have to have a referendum on this law. We just want to get the law passed. The government can pass this law in BC or in any province just by making it happen. The only reason we're pushing for a referendum is we don't have faith in our political leaders in BC to take a stand on this issue. But certainly in Saskatchewan or Alberta or anywhere else in Canada, you could bring the same legislation to your political leaders and say, we want a sensible policing act in Saskatchewan. Let's pass this here. We're wasting a lot of police resources here. We could do it in this province as well.
The public has spoken around the world. People want this drug war over and marijuana legalized everywhere. So those two votes have, they've made a difference.
A growing number of citizens are concerned with the wasted lives and wasted dollars spent on a drug war. They're fighting back to regain freedom and restore sanity, to end this bizarre prohibition that claims there is a bad plant with a bad flower and a bad seed.
Voting with your dollars is the best thing to do, and obviously there's a lot of other hemp products that people could be buying and promoting the use of it as well. And we've got, again, this amazing industry here in Canada that we should be supporting as much as possible.
Legalizing marijuana would be a good start. I think that, as I said earlier, if government has some kind of control over it so that you cut out all of the middlemen, then you've got police focusing their resources on the more serious drug issues.
I'm of the view personally that the only way that we are going to advance is by education, and the education of citizens continues. One would think 10 years ago when this was on the cusp of being legalized that it would have been overnight, we would have been seeing people smoking marijuana in bars and smoking marijuana on the doorsteps of their house.
I've been focusing about getting to those people before they can vote and really educating them against what the school systems are now trying to teach people, like the DARE program saying that a marijuana cigarette has 5 times as much tar as a tobacco cigarette. And those are things that in my family, my 12-year-old brother is hearing in school, and then he sees the rest of his family using marijuana, and it's like, oh, well, how can I still love my family and then listen to my teachers as well? So I find that that is the most confusing part of kind of the battle for legalization and medicinal marijuana, is just the school systems and the government are getting right to our children first and confusing them, and they don't really know what to think.
When the people are ready for their freedom, they'll just take it themselves. 27 US states and 1 Canadian province, if they all vote to legalize it, what can a politician do except just get out of the way of the movement that's going to run them over if they don't?
I can't imagine the US federal government is going to try and crush these people. I don't think the public is going to be bamboozled much longer. They're going to start asking why. Why don't you want to legalize it, Barack? And he's going to have to tell them, because he must have a reason.
To suggest provocatively that we can just wave a wand and make legislation to make cannabis legal is really, it requires international cooperation.
The federal government of Canada has to introduce legislation, somebody, and get it passed. But that's a huge feat, because how much does government ever really get done? So, to even make it a priority would be such a feat. So we're just going to do whatever we can, take any small step we can to reduce the punishments and penalties.
One person can't do everything, but everyone can do something, and everyone should do something, even if it is just talking to your school pals or your workmates or the people in your church. Everyone should become more vocal about this. If we want to end this war, everyone has to do something. Everyone has to be vocal. Everyone has to speak up. When there's a phone-in show on the radio or TV, when there's an opportunity to write a letter to the newspaper, people should do that. And rather than say they did nothing, well, they can say they did something. They did what they could.
I still find the dandelion a curious subject, and wonder how we became convinced in our culture that it's undesirable. But I'll save that debate for another time. Cannabis, on the other hand, is clearly a social issue that needs to be addressed in a more thoughtful manner. Maybe one day we can all see the benefits of cannabis and eventually end this prohibition that unnecessarily ruins so many lives. The interview I had with Bernie would be the last time I saw her. She wouldn't live to see this film. She broke the law by using a medicine in her dying days. A medicine that grows naturally. A medicine that relieved her pain. I refuse to see Bernie as a threat to society or as a criminal. Yet under the current laws, that's what she is. I would like to think that her case is an exception, but it's not. The reality is, there are people faced with a similar situation every day. Education, citizen action, and long-awaited brave leadership can put an end to this.
We are all creatures of love.
Yeah.
And this, I'm in hopes that, it's difficult coming into this home and having an interview because I cannot fathom what you're going through, nor do I want to go through it. But the truth is, we all go through it.
Right.
We all have to deal with this. We all go the same way home.
Well, there's a big adventure on the other side.